Jacob Reynolds cherished the quiet of the Wyoming wilderness. After a grueling week at the lumber mill, he'd pack his truck with canned food, perched on the edge of dense forest land. It was a place where his thoughts could finally settle. On a chilly Friday evening, Jacob arrived at the cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon. He unloaded his gear, took a deep breath of pine-scented air, and set to work chopping firewood. As the axe bit into the logs, he noticed something odd: deer tracks circling the cabin, weaving between trees and crisscrossing the dirt path. He figured a curious buck had wandered too close, but something didn't sit right. The tracks seemed too deliberate, like they had been made with intent rather than aimless wandering. Dismissing his unease, he built a fire inside and settled into his worn armchair. The peace was shattered around midnight by a sound from outside. A low, rasping voice. Jacob sat up, heart pounding as he strained to listen. "Jacob, help me." He froze. The voice belonged to his late wife, Emily, whose memory lingered like a ghost in his mind. Confusion mixed with fear, he approached the window cautiously and looked out into the pitch-black woods. Nothing, just the sway of the trees. But then, again, clear, "Jacob, please." His stomach twisted as he gripped the rifle. Memories surfaced of old Shoshone legends, stories of skinwalkers, twisted creatures that could mimic human voices to lure their prey. He forced a nervous laugh, convincing himself it was just his imagination. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something watched him from the shadows. Comment for Part 2. Part 2. The following day, Jacob found more tracks around the cabin. Fresh ones, circling tighter. The prints were deep and erratic, as if whatever made them was unsteady on its feet. An unnatural silence had settled over the forest, and even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. That evening, while chopping more firewood, he heard it again, his wife's voice, clearer and closer. "Jacob, it hurts. Let me in." He whipped around, aiming the rifle toward the sound, but only saw the swaying branches and thick undergrowth. Shaking, he retreated into the cabin, bolting the door. He stayed up late, his shotgun loaded and his lantern burning low. Just past midnight, a loud thump struck the back wall, followed by scraping, like nails raking across the wood. Jacob's knuckles turned white around the gun. He mustered the courage to peek out the back window. His breath hitched. There, standing in the dying light of the fire pit, was something that resembled a deer, but horribly wrong. Its legs were too long, joints twisted unnaturally, and its face. It was almost human, but stretched and distorted, as if wearing a mask made from flesh. Its hollow, soulless eyes stared right at him, and a wide, unnatural grin split its face. Then it spoke, in a voice that twisted between Emily's and his own. "Jacob, let me in. I'm so cold." He fired through the window without thinking, and the creature screamed a high, bone-chilling wail that made the forest seem to shrink away. When he looked again, it was gone, but a bloody deer hide lay on the ground, torn and crumpled like discarded clothing. Comment for Part 3. Part 3, last part. At dawn, Jacob wasted no time. He stuffed his belongings into his old truck, hands shaking as he glanced nervously at the tree line. The forest seemed to pulse with an unnatural stillness, as if holding its breath. He couldn't get the image of that creature out of his mind. It stretched, grinning face and those hollow, hungry eyes. As he slammed the truck door shut, he hesitated for just a moment. That cabin had been his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pain of losing Emily. Now, it felt corrupted, tainted by whatever dark presence stalked the woods. He thought about burning it down, but couldn't bear to light the match. Instead, he left the cabin standing like a forgotten tombstone, marking a place cursed by nightmares. The drive back to town was tense and uneasy, every rustle of leaves along the road making him flinch. His mind raced with questions. Was it really a skinwalker? Had he just lost his sanity out there, grief finally breaking him? He thought about asking the Shoshone elders about it, but something told him that even mentioning it would bring more misfortune. In town, he crashed at a friend's house for a few days, unable to be alone. When he finally returned to his own place, he didn't sleep for nights, half expecting the terrible voice to find him again. He threw himself into work, taking on extra shifts just to stay busy and keep his mind from wandering back to that cursed night. Weeks turned into months, and Jacob slowly adjusted to life in the city, surrounded by people and noise. He never spoke about the encounter, not to his friends, not to his coworkers. He feared they'd think he'd lost his mind. Besides, a part of him didn't want to relive it, didn't want to admit that the forest he once loved had tried to consume him. But even in the city, peace never fully returned. Sometimes in the dead of night, as the wind howled through narrow alleyways and scraped against windows, he swore he could hear a faint, rasping whisper. "Jacob, let me in." He'd sit up in bed, drenched in sweat, clutching the knife he kept on the bedside table. Logic told him it was just his imagination, but the fear never left him. Deep down, he knew that whatever evil haunted those woods had marked him, and no distance could truly separate him from it. And so he lived, forever looking over his shoulder, haunted not just by the memory of that night, but by the creeping dread that one day, the Skinwalker would find him again.